Hello again. Well, here's another question for the yes or no treatment. It concerns Antonio Salazar, who was the prime minister and dictator of Portugal from 1932 to 1968. Quite a long run. And so the question is, was Salazar good for Portugal? And I think as we go along, you'll find that people's answers to this question kind of divide up along left-wing and right-wing lines. So anyway, we'll get to that later. Well, the starting point for Salazar's story is a military coup in Portugal in 1910 that ended the monarchy. The king's name was Manuel II. And he was thrown out in a coup, and the First Republic was formed. And the First Republic, there are parallels here with the catastrophic republic in Spain that Franco replaced. The First Republic was a catastrophe. It was unstable, it kept collapsing, being reformed, it was violent, there were assassinations. It didn't get anything done, and eventually, as is often the case in situations like this, the military stepped in and undertook a military coup in 1926. At that time, Antonio Salazar was an economics professor, and he was brought in to help stabilize the financial and economic situation of the country. He was made the finance minister, and he quickly sorted out the nation's finances. Within about a year, he had a balanced budget through austerity, through cutting out excessive spending, addressing corruption, all the right stuff. And so he was he was really on a high. And he progressively got more and more jobs in the government until in 1932 he became the prime minister in what was then called the Second Republic. But he formed something called the Estado Novo, the new state. And the new state was buttressed by a constitution, which he himself took the lead in preparing, but was put to a plebiscite, a referendum of the people, which was enormously supported. And so Salazar was on his way. Prime Minister, took on many of the portfolios of the other government departments, became a dictator, a pretty tough chap, and ran the country in many respects quite effectively, although in a very tough way, for that period up until 1968. And Salazar himself was an austere, kind of a lonely sort of academic chap, and brought some of that kind of style into the job. He was anti-military, he was austere, he was pro-Catholic, he was conservative, and he wanted to reform the country in that way. Because his reforms to the finances of the country worked so well, he initially received huge popular support. And in several polls of the nation, he's been sometimes regarded as the greatest Portuguese of all time, or sometimes tied with Prince Henry the Navigator, going back to the eras of Portugal's supremacy in seaborne navigation. Even the deposed king was a supporter, if you can imagine, of the dictator, and so he really was well on his way to having as much power really as he needed. Of course, there was opposition. In 1937, an assassination attempt was made by a Marxist union leader. Bomb went off, didn't hurt him, so he wasn't a very good bomber. But nonetheless, he of course fled. He fled to England, but they caught him, brought him back, and convicted him of assassination attempt, put him in prison for 16 years. Kind of a mild sentence, really, for an authoritarian dictator's attempt on his life. I don't think Franco would have stood still for 16 years, but in any case, that's what happened to him. And so his career went through the war, of which more later, until 1968, when he had a stroke. And he was really disabled, and a new prime minister was appointed by the president. There was always a president who appointed the prime minister. And for the next 2 years, Salazar was bedridden with the stroke, with occasional moments of lucidity, and was not even told that he wasn't the prime minister anymore. So he would give orders from his bedside, which were ignored as soon as the chap who got the orders left the room. Kind of sad, really. In any case, a few years after he died, the Estado Novo continued under his successor, but in 1974, so this is 4 years later, there was another military coup to replace the Estado Novo. And it was called the Carnation Revolution. The reason for that being is the soldiers took to the streets, and meanwhile, a restaurant which had been opening its doors for the first time was going to give carnations to all of its visitors, and because of the coup and the revolution, they were forced to forget about that. So the woman who ran the restaurant came out on the street with the carnations and started putting them in the barrels of the rifles of the army marching down the street. And somehow it kind of caught on, and everybody started to bring out carnations. Not a shot was fired. It was a peaceful coup called the Carnations Revolution, and April 25th, the date of that event, is a national holiday, one of the most important national holidays in Portugal. And in fact, the enormous bridge that looks much like the Golden Gate Bridge across the Tagus River, which was built in honor of Salazar and named the Salazar Bridge, was eventually renamed the April 25th Bridge. So there you have it. That's a kind of the story of Salazar. And he had an enormous impact, as we can see. He made a few enemies along the way, but nonetheless, his impact on Portugal in modern times was enormous. So let's look at some of the arguments. Let's first of all start with the people who say yes, he was good for Portugal. Well, first of all, I suppose the most important point in that line of argument is the fact, really, that he rescued Portugal from the chaos of the First Republic, brought order to it, brought reasonable financial order to the nation. It had its ups and downs. It was poorer than other European countries, but he gradually brought it up. And so he basically took a catastrophe and turned it into a situation that really wasn't too bad. Next, he managed to keep Portugal from the ruins of the Second World War by remaining neutral. As it happened, he was providing help and kind of undercover, part of which was related to its long-standing alliance with England. There is a treaty called the Treaty of Windsor, which was signed in the 1380s. It's apparently the longest still standing treaty anywhere between two countries. And so as a consequence, that connection has always been an important one for Portugal, and as a consequence, its it's kind of its preferences were along the lines of helping the Allies, but it was not done so overtly. Very clever, very clever. Kept the nation from getting wrecked in the carnage of the Second World War. And along with that, Portugal became an important conduit for refugees, Jewish refugees and others, during the Second World War, helped, of course, by its location on the Atlantic Ocean and in the far extremity of the Iberian Peninsula, and therefore performed a valiant and useful service. Many Portuguese families actually took in orphans and displaced people from who were running from the advances of the Axis countries. So, very commendable. Salazar himself was an austere, unflamboyant, modest individual, unlike some of the other dictators like Mussolini and Juan Perón and so forth of his general era. He was lived in a rented house, all of that kind of thing, and he was therefore the kind of person that you might not have had a long, fun conversation with, but you would probably admire for his virtue and his anti-corruption. During the course of his time, he greatly improved literacy in Portugal, which is always an extremely important thing in terms of engaging the populace and gaining not only their support but their participation in the community and in the conduct of government. So he did a good job of that. Under Salazar, Portugal is one of the 12 founding members of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, an organization which has lasted until this day. So in that respect, he was a statesman as well. And finally, his leadership in bringing about the Constitution, which established the Estado Novo, was a remarkable feat, given that it was approved in a plebiscite, guided the nation, provided for a kind of a firm basis for the conduct of government throughout his tenure as prime minister. It also, for the first time, established the right of women to vote. So it had libertarian components as well as a structure to basically bring order to an otherwise chaotic environment. So all of those things, that's a pretty good endorsement, really, when you think about it, for Salazar, and his reputation as one of the greatest Portuguese citizens, to some people's way of thinking is not unwarranted. Okay, well, of course now there are those who oppose Salazar, and I suppose at the head of the list is the fact that he was a tough, authoritarian ruler. There was oppression, there was perhaps torture, there was secret police. He took no nonsense from any kind of dissidents, any opposition, and so forth. A lot of people don't like that, and so he gets marked down a bit for that. Secondly, he was a significant supporter of Franco in the Civil War, the nationalist cause in Spain. The real problem that the nationalists had was that they had really no seaport for the importation of arms to support their military efforts, and so Portugal was able to provide that, and for which Franco was forever grateful. Another negative argument about him was that he wanted to hang on to the colonies. This was at a time when increasingly the colonial empires of the other European countries are being dismantled, falling apart, being taken from them, and so forth. And Salazar tried to hold on to a fault, because the cost of maintaining the empire was something that the nation simply couldn't afford, and eventually that was to come a cropper with the coup that ended the Estado Novo and the Carnation Revolution and so forth, and the final withdrawal from colonies. So he held on too long, and was probably kind of emotionally tied to the past. Next, he was against secularism, against anti-clericalism, a supporter of the church, supporter of Christianity. And for some people, that was not a good thing, because the church, in its kind of authoritarian establishment position in most of these countries, has always had its enemies, and the Catholic Church in Portugal was certainly one of those. So for many people, that was a reason to say that he was not good for Portugal. And finally, I guess we have to say that in general, he was against liberalism, progress, modernity, and chose really instead to favor traditional values, the old ways, the ancien regime kind of thing, and that's really not a way to govern indefinitely. And of course, he finally came a cropper because of that. Okay, well, that's the case against Salazar. Well, what's my take on Salazar? Well, I guess I have to give him some reluctant support. Even though his methods were often repressive, dictatorial, even repugnant, he got the job done. He rescued the nation from a real mess, and sometimes, as they say, you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. So that's really what he was up to. If you're a right winger, you probably agree with me. If you're a lefty, you probably don't. But that's how I come out anyway. I hope you enjoyed it. Give me a like if you did. Subscribe, comment, etc. And I'll see you at the next one. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.